so we're not gonna be able to understand what they're saying, but the visuals are really fascinating. Absolutely. The title basically translates to something like looking closely at gemstones. Hardness of gemstones. Let's identify rare gems, and right away you see how these ideas identifying through just looking and through the idea of hardness, those are things that go way beyond language. Exactly. Our mission today is to pull out those key methods that the videos demonstrating focus on what we can see, and this whole concept of a gemstone's hardness. It's like a visual crash course, how folks who work with gems start to figure out what they're dealing with. Okay, so first impressions, what jumps out at you visually? Well, the video wastes no time getting up close and personal with the stones. You see tons of close ups. The presenters really carefully turning them this way and that in the light, so right off the bat color how the light plays off the surfaces. What we call luster, and any little details you can see inside like clarity, those are your first clues. I see. Do you mean? Yeah. And you can really tell they're paying attention to things like luster by how they're turning the stones right, showing off those different cut surfaces, the facets. Exactly, and those aren't just for looks, are all about getting the most light to bounce back, and that's a huge part of what makes a gemstone so attractive. And it helps a lot with telling them apart. To now this visual approach, it feels like it's got to have some history to it, right? Oh, absolutely. Before we had all the fancy lab test, people basically had to rely on just their eyes to judge stones. It makes you think about how much knowledge you could build up just from looking at these things over generations. And speaking of judging stones, the other big keyword in the title is hardness. Even if we don't know the language, that tells us something super important for sure. Hardness is basically how resistant a gemstone is to getting scratched up, and that's not just some random fact, it's like directly tied to how tough that gem's gonna be in real life. Think about it, a softer stone's gonna be way more likely to pick up scratches from everyday wear and tear, so it's not just about looks. No way. That's why you often see softer stones in those protective settings. When you look at jewelry, helps keep them looking their best. Now I bet the video is probably showing this in action somehow, right? Are you trying to scratch different stones with stuff? Yeah, you got it. Even without the narration, you can kinda get a sense of which gems are tougher based on whether something leaves a mark or not. It's like a test you can do yourself. It all goes back to this thing called the Mohs scale of mineral hardness. It's like a ranking system for how tough minerals are. From 1 to 10, we use that all the time in geology. Yeah, exactly. And the video might not actually say those numbers, but when they're testing for scratches, they're basically showing that same idea. Some materials can scratch others, but some can't. So even though we don't speak in halo, we can see that there's this combination of looking really closely at color, luster, all that, and then this physical test of how hard it is. And that's how you get started with figuring out what you've got. It's really practical, hands-on stuff. It's not about fancy equipment, no, it's just about knowing what to look for. Okay, so for our listeners out there, what we've learned from this deep dive is that you gotta start with your eyes, pay attention to the details, and then think about how tough the stone is, how easily it might get scratched. That's how you start to understand what it is and what you could even use it for. I think that's a great takeaway, and it's really cool to see how accessible that first step in gem identification can be. You don't always need high-tech stuff to start appreciating these natural wonders. So the next time you find a cool-looking rock, don't just toss it aside. Think about what we've talked about today. Maybe take a closer look. See if you can spot some of those visual clues. It makes you wonder, how other cultures all around figured out their own ways to understand gemstones, like those tests we saw in the video. They might seem simple, but they're backed up by tons of knowledge built up over time. Exactly, so maybe that rock you find is more than meets the eye. You never know, right? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time. See.